Hallo liebe Motorsportmagazin.com Freunde und Formel 1 Fans. Heute haben wir uns gedacht, machen wir mal ein bisschen Kultur mit euch. Kultur? Nicht mit uns, nein, wir sind hier bei einem privaten Formel-1-Test von Alpine. Kein geringerer als das australische Supertalent Oscar Piastri ist hier am Steuer eines Formel-1-Boliden. Meister der Formel 2, als Rookie ist er reingekommen und hat sofort gewonnen. Und jetzt wird er auf die Formel 1 vorbereitet. Jetzt fragt ihr euch natürlich, warum darf Alpine hier mit einem Formel-1-Auto fahren? Es handelt sich um den Boliden aus der Vorsaison. Es gab da eine kleine Änderung im sportlichen Reglement. Es gibt den Artikel Testing of Previous Cars und der wurde leicht angepasst. Bislang mussten die Autos da ein bisschen älter sein. Weil wir 2022 eine komplett neue Generation Formel-1-Autos haben, darf man jetzt mit den Autos der Vorsaison testen. Der Red Bull Ring ist natürlich eine fantastische Kulisse, auch ohne Zuschauer und ohne Grand Prix. So ein Formel 1 Auto aus nächster Nähe sehen zu können, welche Performance es wirklich auf die Strecke bringt, ist unfassbar. Vor allem, wenn man in so einer schnellen Ecke steht wie hier, dann sieht sogar so eine Charge Lap, die zwischen den schnellen Runden immer wieder eingelegt wird, richtig spektakulär aus. Das ist jetzt eine langsame Runde und es sind Geschwindigkeiten, die kann man sich nicht vorstellen. Aber wir haben Oscar Piastri nicht nur über die Schulter geschaut, wir haben auch mit ihm gesprochen.
Testing in Formula 1 is pretty rare nowadays and it's something really special. You came as champion in Formula 3, champion of Formula 2 and you're not racing. You're a race driver, you like to race. But how important was this testing program from Alpine for you to commit to the team in long term?
Yeah, it was a massive, I guess, commitment from both sides because the debate towards the end of last year was whether I race in something else, maybe sports cars or something like that, or do the testing program in this year's car. And for me, I felt like there was much more benefit in testing in an F1 car and the most recent F1 car than racing in something else where some of the I guess learnings wouldn't necessarily translate into Formula 1. So for me, it was the sort of best solution we could come up with given the situation. Obviously I would love to be racing this year, but unfortunately it hasn't panned out that way. But yeah, I think, like you said, it's very rare to see a testing program like this these days. So it's a big commitment from Alpine to get me up to speed and to allow me to learn to hopefully get on the grid next year.
What can you learn on a testing day like that you cannot learn in free practice sessions you probably will get this year or in the sim?
I think compared to the sim, there's nothing the same as real life driving. Obviously the simulators, especially F1 simulators, are very, very accurate, but you don't have the air in your face, you don't have the G-forces, so it's never quite the same. So I think from that point of view, it's always very valuable to go testing, and in these long days, first we've got a lot more time than an FP1 session, and just a race weekend generally, we've got the ability to change stuff that isn't necessarily going to make the car faster, but just try extreme things just to see what they do. So that's the benefit of going testing and sort of having these tests compared to FP1. And also for me, it gives me more time to learn as well. I think we did 107 or 8 laps today, and in FP1, maybe you do 30 or even less. So there's much more mileage, and you can try a lot more things during the day.
The problem is probably that the regulations don't allow you to run the current car, that you have to use the testing of previous car regulation. But how much can you transfer from that into the current cars or next year's cars or whatever?
I will tell you once I drive the current car, but in terms of a lot of the sort of I guess driver sort of interface stuff, the steering wheel, the pedals, seats, all of that is massively transferable to this year's car. And just the way the switches work, obviously you can change the diff settings and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff can be carried over if you want. So from that side of things, it's still very useful to understand that. And at the end of the day, it's still a Formula 1 car. It's obviously a very different philosophy. But in terms of the speeds, the lap times are very similar. They're obviously a bit heavier this year. So that's one thing we can, I guess, try to model as well if we want, running the car a bit heavier. But I think there's definitely still quite a lot of stuff that you can transfer into the new year of F1.
This testing program is very much focused on you, which is pretty unnormal because usually they're trying to make the car faster, which is not their aim at the moment. How do you feel that test inside the car compared to what you would call a normal testing day?
I think for me, obviously the car is not going to change anymore. It's not going to be developed. Its life as a race car is done. It's now purely for testing. In terms of that stuff, for me the testing is actually quite similar to the junior testing I've done, because in all the junior categories everyone gets the same car. You can change some setup items, so it's almost exactly the same as going testing now. Yeah, like you said, we don't have any rakes on or stuff like that, and it's the days are, I guess, somewhat to test a few things on the car to see if looking back in to last year whether anything could have been done differently or stuff like that. But when you're the only car on track, the conditions are very different. The tyres are not the same. It's quite difficult to compare. So it's I would say 99% for my learning, which is great. And yeah, I think with the car obviously not developing, I know more or less what the car is going to be like every time. So it's great for me to get used to F1 speeds and the sort of significance of setup changes as well.
What kind of feedback do you get after the runs or in the debrief? Is it just that the engineers tell you what you did, look at overlays? Do you talk to some driver coaches, or are you very close to Mark Webber, who is in your management? Are you talking to Esteban or Fernando? What is the feedback you're getting?
I think in terms of like overlays and stuff like that, it's obviously quite difficult to compare. And I think when you get to F1, you're, I guess, expected to be at a very high level, where you don't need to go for hours looking through your own driving data. In terms of trying stuff on the car, definitely we analyze that and look at what changes did. And when you're the only car on track, of course, it's impossible to compare to anything else. So a lot of the, I guess, feedback is done via feelings and how I thought the changes behaved and stuff like that. So stuff that I can still keep in my mind for when I go into a competitive environment, because at the end of the day we are trying to find stuff to still go quicker. We just don't have anything to compare to except ourselves. So of course I'm trying to learn as much as I can in terms of driving, and learn as much as I can in terms of what setup changes do and how I can manipulate the car myself with my driving style, and also with all the switches on the steering wheel as well. So there's quite a lot to learn, even if there's no lap times or overlays to really compare to.
It's probably a bad question if I ask a race driver if it's better to sit out a year, because a race driver always wants to race. But if you step back a bit and look from the outside, would you say this is probably a better preparation than go straight from Formula 2 to Formula 1?
No, I don't think so. I think the best way to learn is by driving, and I think for me that's not to say that you can't learn a lot this year. I'm already learning a lot, firstly in this testing program, but also the F1 environment and the atmosphere and the calendar is so much more extreme than F2 and everything else I've raced. So in terms of the driving, it's definitely better to of course be racing, but in terms of the media commitments, the traveling schedule, getting used to jet lag, trying to fit in when you're going to go to the gym, when you're going to train and stuff like that, trying to manage a lot of the time management stuff is very, very useful for me this year, because I can do a lot of those things without I guess the pressure of having to perform. You know, on the race weekends as reserve driver, I can do all of that stuff without needing to drive. So hopefully
all the interviews and so on.
Exactly. So you know, that stuff I can get used to. You know, even very small things like signing autographs and stuff like that. You know, how much time do you dedicate to each thing and stuff like that? It's something I've not really had to experience before. So to experience that without the pressure of driving is quite useful to learn this year, and that's what I'm trying to focus on.
So that means you're ready for Formula One?
I hope so. I think in my junior career I've proved on track that I can do the job, and I feel like I don't think I was particularly bad off track either, but I think my eyes have been opened this year with how busy being an F1 driver is. So I think now I've experienced that side as well. I think yes, I'm more than ready for F1.
Da steht der Alpine A521, letztjähriger Bolide, und das ist genau Chassis Nummer 6, mit dem Fernando Alonso sein letztes Podium eingefahren hat, sein erstes Podium seit seinem Comeback. In Doha stand er da auf dem Treppchen, und wenn wir uns das Auto ansehen, sieht man schon, es wirkt einfach veraltet, weil wir diese neuen Autos, die neue Generation schon so gewohnt sind. Deutlich komplexer, vor allem wenn man natürlich hier auf diese Bartsport sieht. Das war ja die Spielwiese der Ingenieure, ist jetzt alles ganz anders. Da gehen die Venturi-Kanäle los, und man kann auch ganz gut erkennen, dass es das letztjährige Auto ist und nicht das Auto vor 2 Jahren. Die sind ja auf der gleichen Basis, viele Teile waren eingefroren, aber der Unterboden wurde abgeschnitten, und das kann man da wunderbar erkennen. Oscar Piastri hochkonzentriert in seinem Auto vor dem nächsten Run. Im Hintergrund sieht man schon die Ingenieure, die Daten analysieren, und einer davon ist Dom Hale, und mit dem haben wir gesprochen.
My name is Dominic Hale. I am the race support team engineer. Basically it's similar to sort of the race engineer department that run the race cars.
This is all about Oscar and not so much about the car. Usually when you go testing, you have sensors, rakes, doing all the different stuff. How different is it from your perspective, having such a testing day compared to a normal Formula 1 test?
It's not actually too dissimilar, because the car is still fairly highly monitored, because you need to check that the car is performing as it did in its race season. The main difference is obviously we're not testing new parts, so we know exactly how the car should perform. We're not looking for new performance. We're just generally learning and getting Oscar up to speed on how a car performs and how to extract speed from it.
Are you doing a lot of setup changes just to make him familiar with how that feels in the car?
Yes, we do. We tend to sweep through a lot of the setup items that we would have during the race season with this car. So when he was close to the debriefs during that year, he now actually gets to experience them and draw his own conclusions on them.
You're testing here with the A521, so last year's car. Is it exactly the same as you've used it last year in the season, or is there anything different?
By regulation, the car has to be basically as raced within season. The primary difference is the tyres themselves are of an Academy range, which is a specific compound range by Pirelli for these sort of tests.
How about the engines? Because these engines are so sophisticated, or not call them engines, power units. Are they made completely new to the old specifications you used last year? Or are they from the stock, or how's that working?
Again, by regulation, they have to be exactly as ran in year. We are using the pool of engines from the race season. As with all the PUs, obviously there is a lifing aspect, so we tend to be a bit kinder on them. We don't do the full quality deployment every single lap, because we've got a year or two to run these cars now. But in terms of absolute ultimate performance, it would be as in year, and it is available to us if we wanted to run it.
Oscar is quite a super talent if you just look at his track record. Formula 3 champion in his rookie season, Formula 2 rookie in his championship in his first season. That's quite impressive. Do you see that during a test as well?
I do. In terms of absolute performance, you probably just have to rely on his championship record to prove that one, because as I say, with differences in tyres and conditions, you can't always compare to the laps that this car has driven in previous events. But from what we've seen, the performance isn't lacking at all. And in terms of his work mentality, he's very quickly picking up all the things that we're throwing at him. and is also doing it in a very sort of calm and regulated manner.
What else are you analyzing? Are you looking at onboard footage to help him? Are you sending people trackside, driver coaches, whatever?
A little bit of some of those. The video perhaps isn't too critical for us because, as with the race cars, it's all there in the data somewhere. During the year, we do have additional engineers come out basically to give or expose him to the sort of information he would be receiving as a race driver. So if we have an aero specialist, if we have a tyre specialist, you know, how you would save tyres in certain conditions. We have vehicle performance engineers explaining how the brake systems work and how we manage brakes, etc. Just at different events during the year, whichever sort of locations are most relevant to each topic.
Auch wenn das hier nur ein Privattest ist, Zuschauer gibt es trotzdem. Übrigens sind das hier die Alpine-Händler, die Lokalen, die haben auch schon fleißig Autogramme gesammelt. Also man lernt hier nicht nur das Autofahren, man lernt hier auch den Umgang mit Fans, mit Alpine-Händlern und mit uns Medien ja auch, dürfen wir auch Interviews führen. Und hinter so einem Test steckt mehr, als man sich eigentlich vorstellen mag. Die Autos sind irre kompliziert, man braucht eine ganze Menge Leute, um die überhaupt zu betreiben. Dazu ja auch noch viel Equipment und deswegen haben wir auch mit Testmanager Andrew Ellsworth gesprochen.
I'm Andrew Ellsworth, I'm a race team manager of this event.
How do you actually choose the circuits you're going to?
We tend to use Grand Prix circuits, F1 Grand Prix circuits obviously. They're quite difficult to book, and I normally book the circuits. So when the F1 calendar comes out in September this year, I will start booking the circuits for 2023. We tend to do, mainly we try to do European circuits. With Oscar this year, we've been trying to put a bigger program for him together. We're trying to do 8 or 9 circuits, all Grand Prix circuits. We've just been to Austin and Doha. We were trying to go to Suzuka, but we couldn't go there because of COVID, the COVID regulations. So we went to Doha instead, and then we have got 5, 6 more European events planned for the season.
How many people do you need for a testing day like this?
We are here with about 25 people, I'd say. That's including Oscar and the physio, and we bring 5 people from Viry to look after the power units, and we are about 18, 19 of Alpine F1 people. So mechanics, chief mechanics, engineers. We also use this the program not only to train the drivers but for mechanics, engineers. Hopefully we'll have quite a young team, and maybe in 2 or 3 years' time they will go onto our race team.
How expensive is such a test?
They vary from obviously the flyaway events are more expensive because we have to do freight. Do the freight by sea freight, it's a lot cheaper than air freight. Air freight is very expensive, and then you have the cost of the circuits. They're not cheap usually for a Grand Prix circuit because you have to have a medical helicopter. We have marshals, you have the circuit, we have to book dry ice, hotels, flights. It's, the trucks have to drive here and back, so it's a big logistics program, and they're all expensive.
How many spares do you bring to such a test?
Well, the 8521 is last year's car, so luckily we have quite a few spares because it was raced last year, whereas before we used to run a 2-year-old car, which is the RS18, and we had limited spares then. But so for here we bring a full car, we have a spare chassis in the truck if you had an accident or something happened to the car, and we have a full spare engine, 2 spare gearboxes, and so we have 1 car and I'd say 2 or 3 sets of spares available.
106 Runden, circa 450 Kilometer, also 1,5 Renndistanzen ist Oscar Piastri heute gefahren. Das hört sich jetzt alles nicht so ultra spektakulär an, aber wenn man überlegt, was hinter so einem Formel-1-Test alles steckt, es ist wirklich unfassbar. Die Eindrücke, die wir hier sammeln konnten, Wahnsinn. Früh morgens schon angekommen, um 8 ist ungefähr Oscar Piastri hier ins Fahrerlager am Red Bull Ring gekommen. Jetzt haben wir schon nach 19 Uhr, also so ein Formel-1-Test erzieht sich wirklich. Ich hoffe, wir konnten euch jetzt spannende Eindrücke liefern. Das war aber nur ein ganz kleiner Teil von unserem, ja, man kann schon fast sagen, Oscar Piastri Special. Das war der Test. Wir haben aber mit ihm an dem Rennwochenende auch noch ausführlich gesprochen über die Anfänge seiner Karriere, wie da alles zustande gekommen ist. Und das könnt ihr in der aktuellen Printausgabe von Motorsport Magazin lesen. Nicht länger warten, gleich bestellen, bevor sie wieder ausverkauft ist.